Press it, it'll take a couple of seconds to kick in. There you go.
Thanks, Millicent. Welcome everybody to the February 2nd meeting of the Bicycle Advisory Committee 5E Subcommittee. This meeting may involve the remote participation by members, either by telephone or other electronic means, due to the local public health emergency novel coronavirus pandemic, pursuant to the provisions of Minnesota Statutes Section 13D.021. Welcome everybody. I am glad that you're here. Hopefully we'll have a start to this meeting than we did our last meeting. I know that was a little bit of a rough entry as we were figuring out some new direction from the clerk's office, but luckily things are a little less formal at the subcommittee level. So I'm looking forward to a good discussion today. First up on our agenda, I believe, is Mike Samuelson here to talk about the capital improvement process for 2021 to 2026. So I will turn it over to Mike.
Thank you. We're actually here to talk about 2022 to 2027. 2021 to 2026 was the CIP that was just approved by City Council. And we are already starting to think about next year's CIP and budgeting process. So I am going to go through a brief presentation fairly quickly. I think I've gotten some feedback in the past. Staff have gotten feedback that we want to make sure to leave plenty of time for discussion and questions. So if there's something that I touched on that you have questions, I'm just going to hold everything to the end. And again, try to go through this quickly and make sure we have enough time to talk towards the end. So with that said, I'm going to share my screen here. Give me just a second. And Chris or Millicent, can you just give me a quick thumbs up or yes? You can see the screen?
You can see it.
Cool. Great, thank you. All right, so again, my name is Mike Samuelson. I'm a transportation planner with Public Works, and we're here to talk about the next CIP, which is the Capital Improvement Program, essentially how the city budgets our capital dollars on transportation over the next 6 years. And so just to give you an overview of what I'll be talking about today, just talk about sort of how the CIP works, how capital programming works here, a little bit about the budget that was just passed, and then spend most of the time reviewing the programs and projects that we are proposing for the upcoming CIP, and then have most of our time for questions and discussion. So this is just a chart kind of showing the life cycle of our capital programming. So you can see we're kind of in this Q1, January to March time period. So at the end of last year, as council was marking up and passing the budget for 2021, we were already starting to work on the program for the upcoming 2022 budget cycle. And then at this point in Q1, we're kind of developing and finalizing what we call our capital budget requests, which are basically funding requests that we put in the CIP and into the budget. Then we go to CLIC, which is a citizen review commission that reviews the budget and the CIP process. They make recommendations to the mayor, who then in late summer puts together his recommended budget, which then goes to council for approval. So this is kind of an ongoing process, and this is kind of the time in the process where we look to the BAC here and as well as the PAC to get your thoughts and feedback. I'll just note that this is the first of 2 presentations that I'll be doing. The second will be in a month or 2, and I think Chris, Matthew, and Millicent are planning to do some exercises between now and that second presentation to get your feedback. So this won't be the only time to talk about capital budgeting. So just a quick note, a few years back, the council passed the 20-year streets funding plan, which is an ordinance which provides some additional funding for transportation projects and also lays out some guidance on how that money is to be spent. I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time going into that. Just want to note that that is a factor in how we budget our dollars. There's also plenty of plans and policy guidance from the comprehensive plan to the TAP that was just passed, Vision Zero, and many other smaller area planning documents that, again, help to guide our funding. So within The CIP, a large portion of our money goes to reconstruction projects. So those are projects like the current Hennepin Avenue downtown reconstruction, where the city essentially replaces pavement, signals, sidewalk, bike infrastructure with new infrastructure. And so this chart that you can see here shows what that amount is in the current version of the CIP. So over 6 years, it's proposed to be just over $300 million. And you can note here that 100% of that funding includes infrastructure for people biking, rather 100% includes infrastructure for people walking, like sidewalks, crosswalks, signals, RFBs, things like that. You can see there, so that equates to about 30 miles. And then of those $330 million, about 2/3 include bikeway improvements as well, and that's about 15.5 miles. There's also programs, which I'll get into later, and then you can see the top of the screen here. There are also some standalone bicycle and pedestrian projects as well, and so we'll get into those in the rest of the presentation. But just want to call out that the infrastructure that's built and the investments that are made in these reconstruction projects include a lot of our best and most costly bike and ped infrastructure. And so here's a breakdown over the 6-year period of the number of miles that we're proposing as part of the CIP. And you can see this is broken out by those reconstruction projects, the standalone projects, and then the programs as well. So you can see over 6 years, we're proposing about 36 new miles of pedestrian infrastructure and 43 new miles of bikeways. So just a note on the budget that was just adopted. So the recommended funding levels that Public Works asked for all of our programs were adopted. There were some of the reconstruction projects that we had on our list in years 2025 and 2026 that were cut, which was anticipated. We typically over-program our CIP, which gives the mayor and council just some opportunity to see what's out there and then to kind of choose what they prefer. And then the CIP did include some new funding for Vision Zero. So that was a new program that's starting this year in 2021. It's including $1 million a year to fund improvements along our high injury streets. So I'm going to get into the individual programs. And the first one is Vision Zero. So again, our Vision Zero program. So you can see this is focused on kind of quick build treatments, whether it's bikeways, bump outs, or other pedestrian improvements, and focus on those high injury streets identified in the Vision Zero action plan. And you can see the city streets, so not county streets, not MnDOT streets, are the one that this is really targeting, and that's what that map on the right side is showing here. Defective hazardous sidewalk program does kind of just what it says. It replaces sidewalk panels that are defective, and so what Public Works does is we go through and choose a few neighborhoods every year, do inspections on those sidewalks, and then replace the sidewalks that are defective. Our sidewalk gaps program focuses on locations where there is an existing sidewalk. Typically, this is focused on areas next to some kind of institution or park. So the 2021 project is in Farview Park in North Minneapolis, and then the 2022 project that's proposed is on the south side of Bede-Mecoska on Richfield Road. Our protected bikeway program, probably very interested, folks on this call are very interested in that. So this is looking at building protected bikeways, whether it is a concrete curb separation, a flex post or bollard separation. We've also used planters in the past. And so with the passage of the TAP, we're looking to build out that all ages and abilities network with this program, as well as with some of our other programs and reconstruction projects. Safe Routes to School program, obviously it helps folks, helps with making it safer to bike and walk to school. The project that we have planned for this year is in Whittier, near Whittier International School. And then we have federal funding next year on 16th Avenue North which will connect a few different schools along that street. And we are also successful in winning some federal funding for the Green Central project, which is in South Minneapolis on 34th Street and 10th Avenue. Our pedestrian safety program focuses on unsignalized intersections along city streets. In 2022, we have another federally funded project, this time on Lyndale Avenue North. And then we've actually bumped up the funding for this program in the past couple of years. So it's previously funded at $600,000 a year. Starting in 2022, it'll be $1 million a year. And again, we're using this to particularly focus on our Vision Zero high injury streets. So just a couple more slides here. I'm just going to now focus on some of our standalone projects. So a couple of big ones that are being constructed this year. On the left is the resurfacing for the Midtown Greenway between 5th Avenue and the western border of the city. And then on the right is the Queen Avenue Bike Boulevard project, which is a 4-mile bike boulevard on Queen Avenue in North Minneapolis, running from 2nd Avenue to 44th. So those are both funded and will be built this year. And then a couple other projects that are proposed in the upcoming CIP. First is on 18th Avenue Northeast Trail Gap. So there's a trail that was recently built along the river, and then there's an existing city trail on 18th Avenue, and there's this 2-block gap where they're not connected. So this project would construct that gap, proposed to happen in the next year or two, so 2022 or 2023. Northside Greenway Phase 1. I know this one has been kind of in the works for a little while now. It was put into the CIP last year for the first time. Will remain in the CIP, proposed to start construction in 2026. And so again, this is a neighborhood greenway that I think it's about just under 3 miles that would be constructed in North Minneapolis along Humboldt and Irving Avenues. So I know that was quite a bit. I'm happy to go back to slides or discuss particular projects or programs in more detail, but at this point, I just kind of want to open it up to any questions or comments from the group.
Thanks, Mike, for that overview. That's super helpful. I see Dan, because we can't do business in the chat, it looks like you had a comment. Do you want to jump in with that? Dan Miller? Sorry, there's 2 Dans here today.
Yeah, Mike, I thought just when you had the slide up that was showing the amounts going to reconstructions and project and program, since we have a new group of people here, it might be good to just explain the differences between those a little bit. Maybe you did that already in the subsequent slides.
Sure. Yeah, thanks, Dan. That's helpful. So just a little bit more detail, and if folks want me to keep going, or if you have more particular questions on the differences, I'm happy to get into it. But our reconstruction projects are where we essentially we tear up the whole roadway. So everything is replaced, from pavement, utilities underneath the street, signal infrastructure. So it's a much bigger investment. It's also a much bigger opportunity for transformation in our streets. Our projects and programs tend to be retrofits of one form or another. So from a bikeway perspective, a good example of a recent retrofit project is the Grant Street and First Avenue bikeway by the Convention Center that was completed last year. So in that case, most of the street stays intact as it is. The curb doesn't move. The pavement is still unchanged. Essentially, what the city does is, in that case, we go in and install a concrete curb in some locations to separate bikes from vehicles, or flex posts to separate bikes from vehicles. So that's the main difference, is kind of the scale and the scope of the project, and the ability for a reconstruction project versus some of these other standalone projects or programs to transform a street. So hopefully that helps clarify. If there's other questions, I'm happy to answer them.
Thanks, Mike. I see Philip, you have a hand up. Would you like to jump in?
Yeah, thanks, Mike. You know, I'm thinking about sort of well, I'm thinking about sort of the sort of pavement condition analysis the city does on an ongoing basis, and then identifying streets for reconstruction. And sort of two questions on the reconstruction. One is, does the city sort of routinely look at 4 to 3 sort of lane conversions when it looks at streets that need to be totally torn up just for engineering reasons? And the other thing is, I think of literally the street in front of my house that's, you know, a block and a half up from the Greenway. We have more bicyclists and walkers than we have cars, because it's basically a 1.5 block street that dead ends into River Road. And so my neighbors, several neighbors, every year at our National Night Out meetings, we say, you know, why do we have all this concrete? Wouldn't it be cheaper when the city has to tear up the road? Wouldn't it be cheaper to either totally close it off, like Milwaukee Avenue, which of course we're familiar with in Seward, or wouldn't it be cheaper for the city not to totally repave the whole thing, reconstruct, repave, but simply make it one way for cars, because there's not that much traffic. So I'm just wondering whether those sorts of analyses, it's really comparing needs with opportunities, partially just looking for cost savings. So that's the thinking.
Sure. I'll try to address those kind of one at a time. So the first question I think was about 4 to 3 conversions and whether we use our reconstruction projects as opportunities to analyze if those conversions are possible. And I would say, yes, we definitely do. I'll just maybe differentiate between the process that I'm talking about, which is the budgeting process, and then the actual planning, design, engineering. So these processes aren't totally divorced. I mean, as we're selecting our projects, we're not just looking at pavement condition, but we're also looking at opportunities to transform streets. But with that said, there's a lot of design and engagement work and planning that happens once a project gets into the CIP. So we're kind of funneling, lots of different opportunities into, kind of narrowing that down into the CIP, and then typically 1 to 3 years before a project is scheduled for construction, that's when engagement will begin. And that's when some of the questions around what do we want to do with that street will be more concretely addressed. Sorry for the pun. But yes, to get back to your question, it's certainly something we think about a lot, and especially now that we have the TAP and we have these various networks established, it's something that we're really factoring into our analysis on the capital side, as far as what streets can we choose that are going to have the most opportunity for a big transformation that meet the city's transportation, safety, climate, and other goals. And then I think your second question is, particularly on residential streets, are there opportunities for the city, rather than to rebuild these streets, to come in and maybe change what the street looks like, whether it's narrow the street. It sounds like kind of what you're talking about is something like a linear park. I know that's something we're thinking about a lot. I might pass it off to Matthew here, because I know he's been very involved in the conversation on the Northside Greenway, which sounds very similar to what you're talking about. He might be able to provide a little bit more discussion about what that conversation is looking like citywide. So sorry to put you on the spot here, Matthew, but anything else to add?
Sure. I mean, the idea of reconstructing and then not putting back the full street, I think, like you said, Mike, is most applicable to the 51 miles of streets that we've identified as neighborhood greenways in the Transportation Action Plan. So the Northside Greenway is on that network, but so are a lot of the other streets that typically we would install bicycle boulevards. So we obviously haven't done one of those yet. We haven't taken an existing residential street and reconstructed it narrower, or like half, is kind of what we're envisioning. But that is the goal. That is something we've identified in the Transportation Action Plan, and hopefully we'll do that. I guess.
Yeah.
Is that what you're thinking, Phil? Philip?
Yeah, Yeah, that helps. So I realize I guess I've looked at sort of the summary of the transportation action plan. I should look at it more carefully, more deeply. Yeah.
So the strategy that I'm talking about is strategy 3 in the bicycling component,
Okay.
dedicated to neighborhood greenways. So
Okay.
there's a more clear vision in that strategy.
And we're going to take some time to look at the TAP later. It's one of the agenda items, so we can talk more about that later too.
Great. Okay.
Thanks, everyone. Any other questions? It looks like, is it Deanna or Deanna?
Yeah, it's Deanna.
Thanks, Deanna.
Yeah, I have a question about how you prioritize projects that are just school, just bike projects. Is there a long-range bike plan? Forgive me, I'm new. That you are working towards, so that as you pick and prioritize, you begin to connect certain networks to make some projects a higher priority than others?
Yeah. So now that the Transportation Action Plan, the TAP, has been passed, that's kind of our guiding document in terms of bikeway projects. In the past, we were looking at the city's bicycle master plan and then the protected bikeway update to that plan. So there's a little bit of a change as far as the document we're looking at this year. I mean, there's also a lot of overlap as far as what's in the TAP and what was in previous plans. So there's nothing really earth-shattering as far as kind of our planning document, but we definitely look to the TAP now as kind of our guiding light in terms of how we're planning our networks.
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments?
Hey, Mike, this is Alyssa. I do have a few comments, I think. So this is my, I guess, third time receiving a version of this presentation. And first, I want to thank you for all the work that went into it. I know it is a lot of work to pull together all of these numbers and sort of be thinking about it through these different lenses. And this presentation has definitely improved year over year as I've seen it. So I know you all are
Glad to hear.
To put in the work. And so just want to say thank you for that. You know, one thing that I think I have in the back of my mind is that it's really difficult looking at this presentation to get a sense of how do our investments in pedestrian and bike infrastructure improve year over year. What are we getting a bigger percentage of the overall capital budget? Is that shrinking because there's not that like larger budgetary context? It's just the bike ped information in here. Similarly, I think like looking at the, 43 miles of bike facilities, looking at that number, that's great. I also have a question about how many miles of car lanes are we producing in the same budget cycle, and sort of what do those two look like when you compare them side by side. So I think my big picture comment would be, it would be helpful for us as a committee, or I should speak for me specifically, to see a little bit more of that context in this presentation, so we have a sense of how are we doing compared to the overall transportation portfolio, not just as sort of raw data numbers.
Sure. So I don't have the numbers in front of me. I think we can definitely follow up with Matthew, Chris, and Millicent with some of the numbers from last year's budget that was just adopted, as far as kind of what those breakdowns look like. I'll also just add a little bit more context maybe to those numbers to say that the 20-year streets ordinance, which I didn't talk about a whole lot, provides some specific guidance, or really more than guidance, rules that we have to follow as far as how we spend our money. And in particular, it calls out that a certain amount of money has to be spent on paving projects. And so within that structure from the city, we're looking to also meet our other goals around transportation that are outside of paving. So, I think probably the best thing that I can do, just so I'm not misquoting certain numbers, is follow up with the other staff on the call to share with the committee and the BAC at large, and then maybe that's something that we can talk about in a little bit more detail at the next session. Does that sound all right? I don't want to punt too far, but I also don't want to share something that's not true.
Yeah, no, I wasn't expecting that you would happen to know all those numbers off the top of your head. But I think they would be good context for some of that decision making that you all are doing, and help us, yeah, just get a better handle on what the whole picture is.
Sure.
It would also be helpful, I think, to hear from you on sort of what is the definition of a paving project, because, you know, from an outsider's perspective, a paving project could be a lot of things, and how that functionally works. So I think that would be a great conversation point to include as well in the next session.
Sure. I mean, that's something that we can talk about now. So, I mean, as far as what we consider our paving projects or how they're defined within the ordinance, those are our reconstruction projects, which we've talked about. There's also our asphalt resurfacing, our concrete rehabilitation, and then there's a couple kind of wild cards. Our ADA pedestrian ramp program is counted as a paving project. Our what we call our cooperative projects. So when Metro Transit's building a bus rapid transit line, or whenever the construction starts for light rail, the city has certain cost shares that we contribute to those projects, and so again, those are things that count as paving as well. So that leaves kind of our non-paving projects, if you will, as bridge projects, our bike ped projects, and then a lot of the lighting and signal work and striping work that happens throughout the city.
Thanks. I was just taking notes. That's quite a comprehensive list.
Sure. Yeah. So I will plan to follow up with Matthew, Chris, and Millicent on the breakdown of last year's budget, and then yeah, we can discuss that when I'm back in a month or two. So thanks for flagging that.
Thanks, Mike. Any other questions from anybody else? If the raise hand function doesn't work for you, feel free to just take yourself off mute and speak.
All right, well, not hearing anything. Thank you for having me, and thanks for the questions and discussion, and look forward to coming back to this group in the not too distant future.
Thanks, Mike.
Thanks, Mike.
Thanks, Mike. All right. Next is the year-end review, which doesn't have a name on it, but I'm guessing is Matthew.
I'm actually gonna leave that, and then Matthew, feel free to jump in as you want to, and anyone else if you have commentary. So basically, this is just for you new folks. Every year, usually a little bit closer to the end of the year, so we've slipped a little bit just because of kind of the craziness of getting all the new members in, and it's just been a weird year in general. But we tried to go through all of the projects, the things that have been built in the previous year, and other things that we've done in the committees, are like some of the big highlights. So this is a little bit funky because it's a smaller list than in previous years. And so partially, I'll just kind of preface this by saying that's just kind of how it worked out. We've done a lot of work for like bike facilities, especially protected facilities, since 2015. It's somewhere over 30 miles, I think maybe closer to 40 miles by now, actually. And this year, just depending on how we kind of shift the money around, some years you have well over 10 miles, or and then this year there's not quite as many. So I'm just going to go through some of that. I've got a few slides, and then feel free to interrupt me as you wish. And I'm just going to go full screen here. So first of all, the BAC passed 34 resolutions despite a 3-month break. So those of you who were on the committee know that we were stalled for a little bit as everything switched with COVID and moved online, and we had to kind of wait for the city to figure out a lot of stuff about how we could meet and platforms and different things like that. So despite that kind of hiatus, 34 resolutions. So every month we're doing at least kind of like 3 to 4 resolutions coming out of the engineering committees and the 5E. And I just wanted to show new members this and a refresher for other folks. If you haven't seen, this is, if you Google Bicycle Advisory Committee Minneapolis, and maybe you've already done that and found this page, you can see just kind of some general information here. And this is also where we add all the minutes, agendas, and resolutions afterwards. So if you work on a resolution and we pass it, and oftentimes we'll kind of refer back to things in other resolutions, this is where you can find those, and you can click on these and then pull up any of those resolutions. So just a tidbit there. And then one of the big things that the BAC helped out with, not just this last year, but over the last really few years, was the Transportation Action Plan, which was formally adopted by Council in December of 2020, which took a lot of input from the BAC, the PAC, a big engagement process, a lot of staff time for us. And so actually after this presentation, we're going to take some time and kind of go through some of this a little bit more. So if you have specific questions, or like I was saying earlier with Philip, want to follow up on those things that we were talking about earlier, we can do that afterwards. But that is our guiding policy for transportation, which includes a lot of policies and kind of program changes. And then also we referred to kind of the network map when we were, when Deanna asked that question, and the network map really shows all the priorities for future bikeways in Minneapolis as well. And this is that map, and there's an interactive map online. Again, we can go through that in a little bit and take a look. Oh, I guess, so one of the highlights here is there's 140 miles of planned AAA routes that we've labeled as near-term low-stress bikeways. So that'll be trails, protected bikeways, and neighborhood greenways. And when we say near term, we're talking about in the next 10 years. So we've got a lot of work to do there, which is exciting.
Chris, could you tell us what AAA stands for?
Oh, yes. The AAA is the All Ages and Abilities Network. So I don't know, Matthew, if you want to say any more about the shift to kind of AAA or not.
Sure. Yeah, it's basically our bicycle master plan. We were toying around with what to call it throughout the development of the Transportation Action Plan, and the idea is that we want the bikeway network to be comfortable and safe for people of all ages and abilities. And the other thing we were thinking about was low stress. So we want it to be a low stress network as well. But basically it'll be made up of protected bikeways on the busier streets and neighborhood greenways on the calmer streets. And then there's a few miles of trails as well, most notably along the river in North Minneapolis. So that's what that means.
Cool, thanks. So now to get into the handful of projects from this year. So one of them is 18th Avenue Northeast between Johnson and Stinson. And if you'll see here, I don't know if my cursor shows up on the thing or not, but on the right side of the screen here, there's a trail. I'm not sure if it's 14 feet or exactly how wide that is, but a nice wide trail there. And that's kind of an expansion, possibly a slight extension. I don't remember if the trail came all the way to the curb or not before, but an expansion and resurfacing of this trail that runs kind of through that wooded area or surrounded by trees behind the quarry over here. And then the rest of the street was reconstructed as well. So some bump outs and brand new street surface. And this is maybe one of the best projects I think just in terms of like before and after that I've seen at the city. And I used to live right over here and I don't anymore. But if anyone's biked on Hennepin in Northeast here. It's absolutely horrible. It's kind of in a valley under this bridge, so cars go really fast. It's 4 lanes undivided, which we know are the most dangerous types of streets on our network. And so Hennepin County did a road diet, which is great. This is a county-owned section. And that road diet goes from, I think, 35W to maybe like 8th or something like that. So a nice stretch there, added bike lanes on the street as well, I think. And then this was Trade Joiner's project, added a nice wide bike path on the north side of the street, which connects the President's Bike Boulevard, which is one of the kind of few AAA north-south routes in Northeast. So a really great connection. And part that's not shown on here is also some upgrades to the signal right in front of, I'm forgetting the name of that, 5 Watt Coffee and like the rest of that building there. And that was a really hard place to cross. And now with the road diet and some signal changes, I believe it's an RRFB. Correct me if I'm wrong, Matthew, but it's just an all around a lot better place to ride. And you'll notice this fire hydrant right in the middle of the sidewalk. And so that's not there anymore, at least.
Chris, you used an acronym to describe the signal. Could you de-acronym it, please?
Yes, rectangular rapid flashing beacon, which is like those yellow flashing things where you press the button and then the yellow flashes. So it's not like a full traffic signal, but it's just specifically for pedestrians that press a button.
I will note, I do believe this is a full signal.
Oh, it is? Oh, okay, nice.
Yeah, it is a full signal now, and they, which is especially nice for crossing on a bike. Awesome.
And then Grant Street and First Avenue. This was Kelsey Fote, who managed this from our group. And this is a nice long stretch of First Avenue. And then once you get in downtown, kind of by the convention center. So there's a protected bikeway on First Avenue, just a retrofit with paint and bollards. And then actually a trail addition with, I think that's curb protected under the snow there. I may be wrong about that. I'm not sure. But then also some other kind of fully reconstructed areas as a part of this. And this one was really tricky for those of you who remember this from the engineering subcommittee. A couple of the intersections have some really interesting bike staging kind of areas to deal with some of the weird alignments and things like that. So that is in there, and I haven't seen this in person, but want to check that out as well. And then Oak Grove and West 15th Street, so over by Loring Park, a nice curb protected bikeway. Luke Hansen brought this project through to the end. Whoops, sorry. And then also some pedestrian safety improvements, like a bump out here, and just kind of teeing up that intersection a little more nicely and taking out some of the vehicles were able to take those curves pretty quick previously the way it was designed. And that did not show up well. Sorry, Dan, I butchered your photo. Dan actually sent this in, but this is Rollins and Elm Street resurfacing, which is was a part of the U of M bikeways that were implemented last year, which was a nice long kind of stretch. And then this year, Christian Zimmerman helped kind of, they repaved this section of it this year and extended it on I believe it's Elm Street is the east-west, but extended it east-west a little bit further as well. I think that's it. So I'm happy to take any questions or comments if you have any. Otherwise, that's all I've got.
Thanks, Chris. I always appreciate seeing some of the stuff that we've only seen on paper, or some of us have only seen on paper. I know other folks live in different parts of the city, but I always appreciate seeing some of the stuff. And yeah, it was also great to see the list of resolutions we passed this year and think about, or I guess last year, and all the work that we did despite you know, COVID and the pandemic and all the things. So I appreciate it. Thanks. Any other comments or questions or things, folks who are on the committee last year, if you have other highlights that you would want to throw out as an addition, now is your moment. All right, not seeing anything for now, but if anybody thinks of anything, we can always include it in announcements. Thanks, Chris. I will pop it back. I'm not sure Chris, are you doing the presentation on city plans and policy?
Yeah, I'm gonna at least control the screen, and then again, Matthew, or really anyone else who wants to kind of jump in on any of these is welcome to. But yeah, so I'll just take it away. Really, this is meant to be kind of informal. We had it felt like this fit in nicely with the two previous agenda items for today, to just kind of go through some of the policies and some of the things we refer to quite a bit in this committee, especially for some of the new folks, but also a good refresher for other members, and just a chance to kind of talk generally about kind of the direction for the city right now with some of these, and how the BAC can support that stuff and guide that stuff. So I'll just get right in here. So I'm just going to do kind of a really brief overview of some of these parts, and maybe if I could focus in on some of like the biking related aspects of these. But so the Transportation Action Plan, as I said, was passed in this past December 2020. And so this is really what sets the policy for all of our transportation decisions moving forward. And there was a lot of work that went into this. And so if there's any like particular section that folks want to see from this, I'm happy to kind of dig in. I was mostly going to focus in on the bicycling section, so maybe that's just where I'll start. And then if folks have other questions or want me to go anywhere, just feel free to reach out. So the biking page, and we've got Matthew on the call who actually led this section. So Matthew, if you want to highlight anything, feel free to do so as well. But we have 11 strategies for the biking section in the TAP. And I'll just kind of read through them a little bit. But so completing the All Ages and Abilities Network is the first one, and I'll just show this here. So as Matthew said earlier, there's 81 miles of protected bike lanes that we plan to build, 51 miles of new neighborhood greenways, and then 9 miles of trails. And that's all to be built within the next 10 years. And I don't know if you have anything to add from that or not, Matthew.
No, I think it's already been very valuable and useful. I think for me as staff in Public Works. So anytime we're reviewing any type of project, we pull that network up, and then if again, like I said, if it's on a busy street, the expectation is protected. If it's on a lower volume street, we expect there'll be a neighborhood greenways. So I think it's nice to have like a subset that is just so clearly identified as our priority over the next 10 years. I think the 2011 was a little less clear on priorities. So that's a nice aspect of it. I saw Deanna's hand briefly, I believe.
Yeah, I guess that goes back to my question I had earlier. I mean, 10 years is a long time. 80 miles is a lot of mileage. How then do we decide what goes into year 2 and what goes into year 10?
Yeah, so that's a really good question, and that's what our CIP team, our capital improvement team, who Mike is from that team, is currently working on. And one of the first things that we did as we were finishing up this plan is they're taking that plan and kind of laying out. So if you see like all these different actions that we call them, say like years 0 to 3, or some of them say 4 to 7, other things like that. They're going through not just for like the specific bikeways, but for all of these to figure out what does that mean for our budget in those given years, and what do we have to start allocating resources towards? For the actual network itself, we didn't outline in the plan which of those routes would go in like year 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So that's something that will happen in this CIP process, which is, again, what Mike was talking about today. And so they'll start to recommend actual reconstruction projects that will focus on these. And that's one way that will satisfy some of these, which is something that like the BAC could potentially have some input on if there are ways you want to like think about prioritizing how we go through this. You could definitely put that in kind of feedback for Mike. And then another way that we do it is we have a regular fund, so a program fund called BIC 28 is the term, but basically $1 million a year is set aside for specifically for protected bikeways. And Matthew, I don't know if that's planned to change for neighborhood greenways at all, or if that'll still be protected bikeway funding specifically.
I'm not sure about that detail yet.
Okay. But so basically that's money that we can play with every year to do, as opposed to like a reconstruction, we do mostly retrofit projects. So that'll be kind of what I just showed with the first street example where you put the bollards and paint. So this, what we've identified in here doesn't say exactly what type of facility will happen or exactly when, but those are some of the things we work through on an annual basis with the CIP. So I don't know if that makes it more muddy or if that helps at all.
I'm sure that over time it will reveal itself to me.
Yeah, and hopefully some of the conversations about the CIP in the next couple months kind of help.
Right. I mean, I'm just thinking about things about, do we look at whether they're geographically distributed? Do we, look at parts of the city that have that have in the past not received, enough attention, that kind of thing, whether that rolls into your decision making as well.
Yeah, definitely. And some of the things, and Mike kind of glazed over this, and there's just a lot of stuff here, I realize. And so, but one of the things is our 20-year streets funding plan is how they kind of prioritize generally where we're spending money on streets. And that has kind of an equity component and starts to score things more geographically as well as taking in other things into account. So I've seen reports that they've put out where like such as like 1/5 of the projects for a given year are in areas of concentrated poverty or different types of metrics like that. So that is definitely happening as well. I don't know. Are there any members who have been around who feel like they want to add anything from like your perspective of how you've started to understand this over time?
Good, Dan, why don't you weigh in? I was gonna do it, but you're the other member.
Dan.
There, I think I'm on. Okay. I think a good way of dealing with some of these documents, at least for me, has been to take a section of this, and you can download it to a PDF on your computer and actually go through and start to highlight information, because it's really easy to get lost on these. They're huge documents. They're well over 100 pages, and but there'll be things that start to kind of click in your brain that you want to sort of pay attention to. And so I've always found it really, really helpful to download parts. This is a big document, but take it at a section and just kind of study it, and it'll help. Thank you.
Thanks, Dan. Deanna, I think the other thing I would add is, well, hold on. Sorry, we have basically a one-room apartment, so when somebody else is on the phone, you can hear it. The other thing I would add is, so Dan and I both served on CLIC, which has been helpful in understanding the budget process and how some of these things relate. I think we often get into situations where we're asking questions, Deanna, like the one you asked about what is city staff doing as far as geographic representation in given project areas, and we get a lot of high level, yes, we're doing that back, and until you sort of dig into some of the specifics, it can be really hard to really get a sense of how does that translate to things happening in practice. For example, one of the things in Mike's presentation slides today was about the sidewalk repair program. And I would bet that on paper, that program is supposed to be geographically distributed a certain way. But if you look at the last 6 years of sidewalk funding and the next 2 years of sidewalk funding, it is all in the like wealthy white neighborhoods around the ring of the city, right? And nothing in North. And there's nothing in North scheduled till 2025. So I think there is a certain amount of interrogation you have to do of sort of what are the policies and understanding those on paper, but then seeing how those land in practice. And it's just taken me a very long time to be able to see some of those discrepancies because the processes are so complicated. I'll kick it to you, Matthew.
Yes, so there's one piece of Deanna's question that I wanted to highlight with the 20-year streets funding plan that was brought up a little bit, because I think this guides a lot of the way we look at things. So this document that I have, this is in the executive summary of the 20-year streets funding plan that you can find on Google, and I can share it in the link too when I'm done here. But I think this part is really important because it's a huge effort that we undertook, I think, in 2018, and it's sort of a basis for how we think about selecting projects, both in the street reconstruction and others. But the first part that I'll talk about is the asset condition, and that used to be the primary, if not the only thing that we looked at when we decided how we were going to select streets to reconstruct. So basically, how bad is the pavement? But it was really important to City Council and Public Works when this went through to also add in a lot of other criteria and data sources, and particularly around equity. And so there's a tremendous amount of data that was looked at, but this highlights a few. So non-white majority, concentrated poverty, vehicle availability, potential users, and then the different modal needs and user needs as well. So that was all very quantitative, as it says. And then we take a look at the qualitative screening as well. And so that's where we think, which segments make sense for the dollar amount. Are there other projects nearby? Does it make sense to do this now versus later? And so there is a qualitative screening process that happens that we then use to select our projects. And so we've used this. This was again primarily for street reconstructions, but we've modified this methodology or this mindset to apply it to our specialty programs like protected bikeways and the street crossing program and things like that. And so I just wanted to share a little bit more about that because this document definitely has driven a lot of how we approach selecting projects. So I'll put this in the link. Right, no, I'm not going to put it in chat. We're not supposed to do that, but we'll just tell you here. You could Google it.
That's great. Thank you.
Yeah.
So yeah, okay. So obviously, I also need to look at this 20-year streets funding plan, but I'm surprised there's not a potential cost-saving screen or sort of points to be awarded. And I'm thinking of, a project in Northwest Minnesota. Well, Maplewood. I'm thinking of a 2018 or 2017 project in Maplewood where the analysis was done. Do we simply reconstruct the street, or do we narrow it, add some infiltration? Can we downsize the stormwater? And my sort of memory is that there was like $1 million to be saved doing a better job on the street. And so obviously I should look at this 20-year funding plan, but it seems like the process should involve, can we save money here? Because then obviously we can do more projects if we're doing a better job and saving money. So, and that's just sort of running through my mind, also it's so I think it's so helpful to be able to say to someone who says, why the hell do we have these bollards and why are we getting narrower streets? And I don't bike and no one bikes in the winter. And I think it's useful to be able to say, no, in fact, people do bike in winter and people bike. And in fact, we can save money on some of these projects. So I think, I don't know, having that screen or just making it more sort of clear and to really sort of tout any cost savings in a project is kind of what's going through my mind here.
Matthew, I wonder if it would be useful, I have a very high level understanding of this, but to talk through some of the logic of why we have a 20-year streets funding plan in the first place.
Okay, there is a video that we need to find. It was a fantastic video that explained the need for this, and it was interestingly, Philip, it was tied to funding in a much different way than you're talking about.
Okay.
So it sounds like you're talking about like if we don't build, the
standard
as much infrastructure, it'll cost less. It'll cost less to maintain. There's other benefits, things like that.
Right.
I believe a big part of this, and again, we should find that video and share it, because there is an explanation about the there's essentially a cost argument of the need to significantly invest more money in reconstruction of streets because the pavement condition, the average pavement condition, if without additional funds, will just continue to go down. And the assumption there, or the thought, is that it's going to cost much more to just maintain what we have if we don't keep that the average PCI at a certain level. Now again.
Oh yeah, I get that. Yeah.
So maybe, but it's much more eloquent and maybe not eloquent. That's probably not the right word, but smarter people than me made a good presentation about that. So I'm going to make a note to find that and send that out to the group.
Thanks, Matthew. And PCI is?
PCI is Pavement Condition Index. So it is a score for the literally the condition of the street. It's been based on observation, and then it's also automated more recently with a van that can like pick it up. But it's basically like how cracked is the street, how beat up is it, and the idea is I believe 100 means it's like was just paved and it's perfectly smooth and good, and then as you get down the scale, it's beat up, it's got cracks in it, potholes, and the foundations gets bad and all of that. So it's a way that it's a scoring system that gives us a sense of like relatively how bad is the street from a condition perspective.
Thanks, Philip. Did you have more comments or questions, or should I kick it back to Chris?
Oh yeah, well actually, Matthew, I was thinking we were talking about the Minnehaha Avenue 4-to-3 conversion, adding concrete for the bicycle ways, and I was sort of wondering. I was thinking, well, this might be like that Maplewood project, where depending on how you count the benefits, what your time scale is, where we may be able to say the way we redid Minnehaha Avenue is going to save the city money, and of course provide the multimodal benefits. And I think telling that story just feels so important for obviously decision makers, but also just for community members who may not be much. They may not walk or bike much, or even take the bus. And it's like, why are we doing this for anything other than cars? Yeah. So.
Yeah, Philip, I'll say the conversation that you're bringing up is fascinating to me, and I'll just say I'm not often in on that side of the conversation. It's more, and it may be happening, but it is more of a cost in terms of like how much does it cost to build new things and maintain them. But I do totally appreciate the perspective of, what if we just don't build as much back, or think about the useful life of a facility and things like that. So it's interesting.
So I think it's a great conversation to keep having. I'm sure it'll come up again. Chris, I know you've got 3 other policies to go through before 5:30, and I'm not even sure if you have more on the tap. So would love you to jump back in.
Sure. And I'm happy to kind of spend. It would be nice to touch on all of those, but I'm happy to spend time wherever you all want to. But I'll just highlight one other thing in the TAP as a specific thing for the TAP, and then also just kind of generally for like what the TAP means for the BAC. And so I picked out one that I think the BAC will be really interested in, which is maintaining our AAA network to provide year-round access. And so really talking about winter maintenance. And so like developing and implementing a winter maintenance plan that's regularly updated. So the 5 E's, like this subcommittee, ideally what will be happening or like what will be happening the way these are set up is that as we work on these things, these are the types of things that'll be coming through this committee so that you all have feedback and input as we kind of start to work on these things. And again, this is a year 0 to 3 thing, and there's a lot of year 0 to 3 stuff. So I think this committee is going to be really busy over the next couple years with things like this. So as you have time, if you haven't spent time like kind of digging into these before, just take a look at these and see which ones kind of stand out to you. And odds are that we'll be either bringing them forward soon, or feel free to kind of highlight them as things that you'd like the committee to push for. Let me go back to the agenda here then.
Actually, Chris, can you go to Bike Lanes 6.9 and 6.10?
Oh, sorry, I just went. Yes.
Since you highlighted the maintenance, I want to highlight this. So currently, I think, and we've talked about this over the years in the BAC, but protected bike lanes are like a winter facility that is great compared to standard bike lanes, especially next to parking. And so what I mean is we all know that standard bike lanes next to parking pretty much go away in the winter, and it's just very challenging. And the protected bikeway system, as we've been building it out over the past 5 years, we've been sort of adding a maintenance commitment to those miles to try to clear those bikeways within 24 hours at the end of a snowfall. And so Bike Lane 6.9 more or less just, I guess, reiterates or articulates that commitment for our trails and protected bikeways. And then 6.10, you notice the language does change a little bit because we don't currently do it now. But what it says is determine the best way to ensure that the existing and future neighborhood greenways have that same level of service expectation. So that's going to be an interesting one. It's very challenging because these, currently the bike boulevards and the future neighborhood greenways are residential streets, 32 feet wide with parking on both sides. And so we've talked about different ways that we could possibly do that. Add them to the snow emergency route, or, basically just figure out ways to make that, make the expectation that that'll be similar to protected bikeways to give people that comfort that they'll know when it'll be cleared. And so that's one that I'm excited to think about in the first couple of years of TAP implementation.
Cool, thanks, Matthew. All right, so I am going to pull up our capital budget requests document. And so basically the CLIC and capital budget requests go together. And CLIC, I think you may have heard Alyssa refer to it earlier. She's one of the BAC members who happens to also staff this committee. So it's the Capital Long Range Improvement Committee. And Alyssa, feel free to, actually, do you want to give a quick overview of what CLIC is?
Sure, I can do that. Put me on the spot.
Yeah, sorry.
So the Capital Long Range Improvements Committee is the citizen advisory committee to the mayor and council on the 20% of the city budget that is capital improvements. It includes transportation is a huge portion of it, but it also includes things like storm and sanitary sewer, maintenance or construction within city-owned buildings, anything that's infrastructure, this committee will review. This is really the one public engagement point that everybody, we don't have a participatory budgeting process is what I'm trying to say. There's not a particular way for like people who live in the city of Minneapolis to get transparency and input into our budget, like places that do have a participatory budgeting process. And so the CLIC process and the CLIC report is really how that budget process engages with residents of Minneapolis. There are 2 appointees per ward. So there's 26 ward members. There's also some, I think 6 mayoral appointees on the board. And they sit sort of between the mayor and the council. So the departments come up with what they want funded. They put together capital budget requests. Those go to the CLIC body, and then the CLIC body sort of makes a recommendation and says, Mayor, this is what we think you should put in the budget as far as capital requests. The mayor can listen to that and also can choose to ignore it because it's an advisory body. And then the mayor's budget will go to council for final edits and approval. It's sort of like the high level process. There was a slide in the CIP slides earlier. I don't know if that was the right level of detail, but Dan is also on CLIC, the Capital Long Range Improvements Committee. So Dan, do you have any other things that you would want to add?
Yeah, what you're looking at here is the report, not the capital budget requests. So after, there you go. Those are the capital budget requests. And since you have a link to it, you can go through and highlight any of those requests that are on there, and it will open up a page. If you go down another page, I think you'll get something that deals with Public Works there. So is there something interesting to look at? I can't tell from this screen, but if there's, or if you go down farther, you might see a BIK. There you go. Pull up Parkway paving. That's a good one to just start with. Or actually, did I see, go down to, there you go.
Too
right.
late, sorry.
That's all right. So what you'll see here is sort of a template of that. It'll just go through this template of information that talks about why they're doing it, when it's going to be getting done, when they're proposing to get it done. It'll give you a budget amount, how much it's going to be spending for the 5 years. It's a lot of information. This was probably a bad example, but what you might want to do is to go back to that table of contents and find one that you have some connection to and just start exploring it. I saw 37th Avenue reconstruction. If you go into this, you'll find the bike projects, which I think are down at, there's a few pages down. I just saw Bryant Avenue. So it's not as detailed document as what you would see. It's more of a budgeting document, and those projects are scored. And if we go back to the other report page in this document, and I was trying to scroll through it, but either in the front end or in the back end, you will see kind of how these projects are scored. And they're scored at 300 points, and it'll give you some idea of how 30 citizens, there's 30 residents, actually take a look and try to fairly ascertain how they can score these projects based on some windows that are done. That's a lot more information than you probably need, but they're 2 very different pieces of information. The other piece in the CLIC report, which you're looking at now, is towards the end are public comments. People can sometimes, they'll say that this project is important and they will give this to CLIC. All those documents, those recordings go in, they go before the mayor and they're part of this project. last year, 2 years ago, the Northside Greenway, which was a project that had been looked upon and has been studied for, I don't know, well over 10 years. And a group of Northsiders came in and they testified. And they brought with them paper and they brought with them testimony, and every one of those documents is in this report. Now, I think that there was probably, I think that this was under discussion for a long time before, but it didn't hurt that they showed up at that public hearing and gave a presentation. And so it's a way, as minor as one might think it is, it's a way that the public can be involved and voice a comment on these public capital budget requests. So I would welcome if this is a lot of information, but it's something to talk about. And if I can be of any help online, offline to help explain some of this stuff, I'm a phone call or an email away. So thank you.
Thanks, Dan and Alyssa for that. Yeah, so as Dan showed and said, like there's a lot of information here. And one thing that I was just thinking, Deanna, you were asking kind of if like how we prioritize. So like there's a ton of information here, but really part of why we couldn't like go that detailed and tap of like year by year is because this process and how complicated and detailed it is. So really this is how that's done, and it's a mixture of kind of analytical, qualitative, and then political as well, ultimately with the council and the mayor figuring out the budget passing. But Alyssa?
Yeah, it occurred to me, I guess I will add one thing about the budgeting process, right? So the CBRs are the recommendations from the different departments. And so in terms of where it's important for the BAC to weigh in, once we have those recommendations, it's really important for us to say, here's what we support, here's the kinds of projects we think you should be funding. But also, CLIC is only getting the things that the departments are proposing. CLIC cannot propose a separate project, right? Like that is within the purview of the departments. So the other thing that it's really important for us to do as the BAC is to push Public Works to say, these are the kinds of projects we need you to be proposing, right? It's sort of like when you, in politics, when there's like a candidate who gets an endorsement or by a party, right? Like we have sort of the ability to be having the conversation at the primary level and saying like, this is the candidate we want, right? We're having the conversation and saying, these are the kinds of projects that you need to be pushing forward. So we sort of start at the very beginning of that budget process. So I don't know if that's helpful context for folks to think about where is it important for us as a body to weigh in.
That's really good insight. And I'll just pull out one specific example of how the BAC and PAC influence this. Exactly in the way that Alyssa said is, so for years, the BAC and PAC have been asking for a way to fund quick build projects, which is what this Vision Zero program does. And so typically these are like low cost treatments that we can plan and build within the same season, like within a year. And so this is actually a new funding source as of this last year, and came directly out of kind of, I guess, advocacy from the BAC and PAC to have a funding like this. So I think the way Alyssa just said it was spot on, that if there are certain types of things you all want to see that aren't reflected in the way that we fund programs or projects, that's really kind of the crux of what we're asking for your input on, and in terms of the CBR CIP process. So again, this is another thing that if you want some light reading after work on the weekend or whenever you have spare time, this is here, and these links are on the agenda. And then there was one other thing that I wanted to go over that many of you are probably familiar with, but the Complete Streets policy. And the first thing I'll start off saying is that we're in the process of taking another look at this right now. And Matthew, I believe you're on that working group. So if you have anything to say about that, let me know. But kind of rethinking what the Complete streets policy means for the city and how to enact that on projects. This was passed, I actually don't know off the top of my head when this was passed. Does anyone here remember within the last?
Go up to the top. I think it's definitely 2015 or 16. I think it might be 16. I think 16.
That sounds right. So this is a relatively new policy, but something that the BAC brings up a lot in terms of how we approach projects. And so really this just lays out kind of the order of importance for making a complete street and who we prioritize in terms of the vulnerable users, people who are walking, and then people who are biking and taking transit, and then people who are driving in vehicles afterwards. So this is here as well. Matthew, do you have anything else to add on this policy?
I don't think so.
Okay. Yeah, so I think that's everything that I've got. I don't know if anyone else on the committee wants to add anything about the complete streets policy or any other questions, or otherwise I'm done.
All right, I'm not seeing any raised hands or any folks taking themselves off mute. So thanks, Chris, for going through some of those key documents. I think that's really great stuff to ground ourselves in as we go into the 2021 year. If there's nothing else on that, I will transition us over to announcements. I have a reminder from Millicent to complete your oath of office and ethics trainings. If you got an email about one of those, you only have to complete one of those. If you got an email about both, you need to complete both. Matthew, I don't know or Millicent, I don't know if you have any updates on Millicent. I know you were hoping you're continuing to work on being able to administer that oath remotely. Yeah,
that capability hasn't come yet, but please, if you can, find a way to get the oath of office completed if you come downtown, or if you get a notary of your own.
And I did go to the office for mine, so if anyone has any questions about the City of Minneapolis safety setup, feel free to reach out to me. Dan Miller, announcement? You're unmute, Dan.
There you go. This past Friday, there was an announcement of the 2020 Regional Solicitation Awards. This is federal funds that are distributed through the Met Council and 5-county area. And one of those awards happened to be to Lowry Avenue Northeast between Marshall Street and Washington, and with an estimated completion date of 2026. This was to the tune of $7 million. So this is a big stretch that by 2026, not only in addition to what you saw at the last meeting about Lowry Avenue between Washington and Johnson being constructed in 2023, this pushes it to the river, and it's incredible. So big news for us Northeasters. Yeah.
Thanks, Dan. Other announcements?
I just have a quick announcement, and I'm going to follow up with a couple of you. I met with a high school this week that's downtown. And again, like many of our high schools, so interested in using NICERIDE, and we've never had success at having NICERIDE be available to high school students. So if anybody had any ideas or strategies to make that push, I would love it if you reached out to me. And like I said, I'm going to reach out to a few of you.
Jenny, this is Cadence. I used to work for NICERIDE a few years ago now, in 2016, before the acquisition of the acquisition. So I'm not 100% what The user agreement is right now, but I know that that was a barrier that we talked about, you know, years ago, and part of it's like a liability issue, people being under the age of 18 being able to rent a bike. There has to be like some sort of parental waiver or signature, like if they're under that age. So I don't know how that's changed, but I'm imagining it's probably also a barrier presently, but I'm happy to hear that you're working on it and trying to change it. So good luck.
Yeah, thank you. Well, and a parental waiver is probably a barrier that's not easily, but we can overcome that because we have to have those for every field trip, and every bike event is considered a field trip. So we'd be able to get those parental waivers. So thank you.
Thanks, Jenny. Other announcements? All right, Bree, I see you.
It's not an announcement, but as a new participant, could you go through, was this a typical subcommittee of the 5 E's type meeting? And I know I had talked to folks, and I think someone said that like you have deeper conversations about the 5 E's or 6 E's or whatever. And I was just wondering, because I haven't seen any of that in this meeting, how that fits in, or else I just maybe misheard them. Thanks.
Matthew, are you off mute because you want to jump in?
No.
Okay.
I am off mute. I guess I will talk. That's an interesting question. Bree, I'm trying to think of what I think about the question, or how to answer it. In a sense, I do think this is a typical 5E meeting in terms of like the agenda items, and this is kind of like what we plan for as a little bit of the early stages of the new cohort of the BAC. But I'm interested in what maybe you had in mind in terms of the deeper conversation of the 5 E's, because that's intriguing to me, and I'd be interested what that might look like. And that's not necessarily on you to answer right now for us, but maybe something for us to think about as a committee.
Yeah, I just kind of envisioned, I mean, and I don't know if this is true, like as a committee with new members, just making sure that we at least have a streamlined idea, and maybe it is a consensus, or maybe that's the goal of what we want to advocate on this committee. Like for me, I was thinking, you know, with equity, having those larger conversations that Deanna brought up of like, how do we as a committee make sure that neighborhoods and communities that are usually not prioritized get prioritized, and having those conversations on how we do that. Like even example of like having representation on the BAC of those community members, and also, and these are really big questions, right? And then also of like how everything, like the BAC connects with, you know, police abolition and or reform and housing and things like that, because we're just not living in this bicycling bubble, and how we move forward with those types of conversations and what our role as BAC members to move that forward.
I see both the Dans have their hands up. Before I call on you, I just want to say, I know we're coming up on time, so if we pass 5:30 and folks need to drop off, please feel free to do that, and know that thanks for being here, and you don't have to stay late. Dan, I'll pop it to you for a second.
Let Dan Booty go first. You're on mute, Dan.
Oh, sorry. To speak to the deeper conversation versus presentation question, I can't speak as much to this past year, but the previous year, I would say it felt about 50-50 split to me, maybe. There were some meetings where it was very presentation focused, but then there'd still be room for discussion after that. And then there were some meetings that were really much more discussion focused in the 5E subcommittee. And we did have a couple sort of like mission of the BAC 5Es committee discussions that I think were helpful and sort of to the point of what you're talking about. So yeah, I'd say in my experience, it was sort of split between presentation and discussion.
Thanks.
Dan Miller, now you're talking on mute.
I think today was an overview of a number of things that were meant to just introduce you, the items underneath number 6, and an intro into things that we deal with here. The presentations underneath 4 and 5 may be things that would come to this committee or to the other one or to the full committee. And I would agree with Dan. And you know, we spent a lot of time talking about equity this past year. We've spent a lot of time actually developing parts of the transportation action plan. So that transportation action plan represents work that was done. We did a lot of work on that this last year. That's it. Thank you.
Chris and Matthew.
Yeah, well, I just wanted to say I appreciate you bringing that up, Bree, and also what both Dans have said before. We have done some things like that in the past, and we've had some pretty really in-depth. Alyssa kind of helped shape a lot of the conversations that took really months about equity and safety and police interaction, and had like kind of some education and learning about that stuff, as well as putting out some resolutions and thoughts on that. But I'll just say, I think now that the Transportation Action Plan has passed, it feels like a really good time to kind of level set, and with new members coming in, to do some of that high level thinking of what is this BAC's kind of like priorities and things like that. So it does feel like we're kind of due for some more of that and kind of a refocusing. And I totally hear what you're saying about some of those bigger equity issues, as well as having the BAC membership look more like the communities that we're trying to serve is something that we've talked about a lot. And I think we should absolutely kind of bring that up again as a priority. And we'll have new applications in not too long, or actually, and one other last thing I'll say is, it sounds like you have some really good thoughts on this, and if you are interested in co-chairing or chairing the 5E, we will be looking for someone to fill that role, and that's exactly the type of kind of thinking we're looking for that. So if that interests you at all, I'll just say I appreciate you bringing that up, and so maybe that fits with kind of your thoughts. No pressure.
I was gonna plug the leadership post on 5E as well. You know, staff, we try not to I guess dominate the agenda setting. Sometimes we may I guess talk about whether or not a particular item makes sense to have somebody come present, or you know, we may ask like where do we want to go with this? What's the goal of a particular item? But at the end of the day, especially the 5E subcommittee, the agenda can be pretty open to where you all want it to go. And so I just encourage Bree and others that may be interested as well to think about that for the next full meeting for elections.
I think the only thing I would add to all the really great things that everybody has said is it does feel like the calendar of the BAC has a little bit of a cycle, and we're in a weird point this year where like typically you would be coming onto the committee and we'd be having these conversations in like July and August and September leading into the conversations about like the passing of the current budget and any of the policies that need to get passed before the end of the calendar year, going into like the click CBR process early in like Q1. And so we're also just in this weird space this year where we're trying to do everything at once because of some delays in the calendar because of the new things from the clerk's office. So just want to recognize that our agendas are just over full and we're not going sort of according to our usual calendar flow, but typically we would have some. I feel like in the years I've been on the committee, we typically do have a couple months where we're really focused on some of the questions you're asking, Bree. Dan Booty.
Yeah, I was just going to say too, I think having the grounding with some of these big policies is good because they're referenced in a lot of the resolutions that we work on. So saying like in accordance with the city's complete streets policy, so forth. So just knowing what those contain really helps with drafting some of those resolutions.
Last thing I want to say is I'm noting a question. We should talk, maybe it's at the executive committee, but about connecting some of the returning members with the new members. I'll just say, Maya, you haven't missed an email, but we should, the executive committee should talk about that.
Bree, did that answer your question? Do you have any other follow-up thoughts? The online format doesn't have the usual back and forth of a conversation, so I want to make sure we get to close the loop with you.
Oh yeah, no, thanks everyone for sharing your thoughts, and yeah, there's lots to think about, and I'm excited to work with everyone on these bigger picture issues and really make changes in a positive way.
Thanks, Bree. Any other questions or announcements? Last call. All right, with that, I will adjourn us for the evening. Thanks everybody for being here, for participating in the discussions and going through all the documents with us. Think about if you want to run for BAC office at our February meeting. And get your oaths of office in so that you can vote on our new officers in February.
Thank you.
Thanks everyone.
Thanks, everyone.